In November 1972, something unusual happened across American television markets. Dozens of CBS affiliate stations quietly refused to broadcast an episode of a hit sitcom. Sponsors got nervous. Newspapers argued about it for weeks. Thousands of angry letters landed on CBS's desk. And yet, when the episode finally aired in most places, roughly 65 million people watched it anyway. The controversy wasn't about violence, politics, or a war. It was about a fictional woman named Maude Findlay, played by an actress named Bea Arthur, who decided at age 47 to have an abortion, months before the Supreme Court would even hand down Roe v. Wade. It was one of the boldest things American network television had ever aired, and it was carried entirely by a performer that Hollywood, for most of her life, had assumed would never really make it. Bea Arthur didn't fit the mold. She was unusually tall for a woman of her era, with an unmistakably deep voice and features that casting directors considered too severe for the ingenue roles then in fashion. She'd spent time as a servicewoman, briefly trained as a medical technician, and worked for nearly 3 decades in relative obscurity before her name meant anything to the public. The very traits that once got her passed over eventually became the exact things audiences couldn't get enough of. She was born Bernice Frankel on May 13, 1922, in Brooklyn, New York, to a Jewish family of Polish and Austrian descent. Her father, Philip Frankel, and mother, Rebecca Pressner, later moved the family to Cambridge, Maryland, a small town where they opened a women's clothing shop. The Frankels were among the only Jewish families in town, and the community offered almost nothing in the way of theater or performance culture. Even so, young Bernice fell in love with the movies. She imitated the voice of Mae West and practiced the smile of film star June Allyson, quietly nursing a fantasy of one day performing herself, though what she actually pictured, she later admitted, was becoming a little blonde girl who could sing and dance like the Hollywood ingenues she admired on screen. Reality had other plans. By age 12, she'd already reached nearly her full adult height, taller than every other kid in her class. School plays cast her in male roles rather than the female parts she wanted. She felt self-conscious about her appearance for years, but she compensated with a sharp tongue, and her classmates eventually voted her the wittiest girl in school. At 16, she was diagnosed with a blood clotting disorder, prompting her parents to send her to Linden Hall, a boarding school in Pennsylvania, for her final 2 years of high school. The time away built her independence early, though she still didn't dare pursue acting seriously. She assumed her parents expected something more practical from her. After graduation, she spent a year at Blackstone College for Girls in Virginia, torn between wanting an artistic life and wanting a stable one. World War II changed her trajectory before acting ever did. In 1943, she enlisted in the newly formed United States Marine Corps Women's Reserve, becoming one of the earliest women to serve in that branch. She started as a typist in Washington, D.C., then requested a transfer to the Motor Transport School at Camp Lejeune. From there she became a truck driver and transportation dispatcher stationed at Cherry Point, North Carolina, eventually earning an honorable discharge in 1945 with the rank of staff sergeant. After the war, she briefly tried a completely different profession, training as a medical laboratory technician at the Franklin School of Science and Arts in Philadelphia and completing a hospital internship. It didn't take long for her to realize the work wasn't for her. That realization sent her back toward the arts, this time for good. In 1947, she moved to New York and enrolled in the dramatic workshop at the New School, beginning her career as a young stage actress under the name Bernice Frankel. She became closely tied to the Cherry Lane Theatre in the early years, appearing in Shakespeare, Greek tragedy, and contemporary European plays, almost always in small parts, almost always unnoticed outside New York's own theater circles. For more than 10 years, she remained essentially invisible to the wider country. It was during this stretch that she came to understand just how sharp the divide was between the New York stage and the Hollywood studio system. At roughly 5 feet 10 inches, with angular features and a husky voice, she simply didn't match what casting directors in the 1950s wanted for leading ladies. Instead, she was repeatedly offered older or hard-edged supporting characters. The qualities that once felt like liabilities were slowly, without her fully realizing it, becoming a signature. She also began appearing in early live television, Programs like Studio One, Kraft Television Theater, The Seven Lively Arts, and Caesar's Hour, gaining camera experience even in minor roles. In 1954, she landed a more substantial part as Lucy Brown in an English-language production of the Threepenny Opera, which also marked her first time working with the acclaimed performer Lotte Lenya, someone she later cited, alongside acting teacher Lee Strasberg and Sid Caesar, as one of the three biggest influences on her craft. Through the rest of the 1950s, she kept working steadily between Broadway and off-Broadway. A performance of the song Garbage in the revue Shoestring Revue caught the attention of a young writer-producer named Norman Lear, a connection that would matter enormously more than a decade later. Around the same time, a nightclub owner told her she should lean into comedy rather than sticking strictly to drama. Neither encounter seemed significant in the moment. Both would end up reshaping her entire career. It wasn't until 1964, after roughly 2 decades of grinding stage work, that critics really started to notice her, when she joined the Broadway cast of Fiddler on the Roof as the matchmaker Yent. It was only a supporting role, but her sharp delivery and unmistakable voice made an impression, and it's generally regarded as the moment her name started to carry weight on Broadway. Her personal life was under strain at the same time. Her husband, director Gene Saks, was diagnosed with hepatitis and had to step back from work, leaving the family's income largely dependent on her acting. She kept working steadily, effectively becoming the family's primary breadwinner while also raising their 2 adopted sons. In 1966, Saks was chosen to direct the Broadway musical Mame. She'd hoped to be cast as the title character, but the producers gave that role to Angela Lansbury instead. Rather than walk away, she took the supporting role of Vera Charles, Mame's sharp-tongued best friend, and won the 1966 Tony Award for Best Featured Actress in a Musical for it. Lansbury won Best Actress the same year, and the 2 women became close, lifelong friends through the experience. The Tony pushed her name beyond Broadway and into the notice of television and film producers, who were increasingly curious about an actress with such an unusual look and voice paired with impeccable timing. Still, she kept most of her focus on theater through the late 1960s, gradually expanding into film and TV. In 1970, she landed a modest but noticeable film role in Lovers and Other Strangers. Not a lead, but a real step up after 2 decades primarily known as a stage performer. By the early 1970s, she was a respected name in theater circles but still largely unknown to the television-watching public. That changed when Norman Lear, the same man who'd noticed her a decade earlier in a review, asked her to join All in the Family in a recurring role. She initially turned him down more than once, reluctant to commit to a long-running series or leave the stage behind. Eventually she agreed to appear in 2 episodes as Maude Findlay, Archie Bunker's outspoken, politically liberal cousin. The response was immediate and enormous. Audiences reacted so strongly to Maude that CBS greenlit a spin-off series within months. Maude premiered in 1972 and ran for 6 seasons and 141 episodes, turning B. Arthur into the anchor of one of the most fearless sitcoms American television had produced. At a time when comedies rarely centered on a middle-aged woman, let alone one who was loud, opinionated, and unapologetically political, Maude broke the mold entirely. The character was blunt, hot-tempered, occasionally over the top, but always willing to say what she thought. The show tackled subjects most sitcoms avoided completely: the Vietnam War, the Nixon administration, divorce, menopause, alcoholism, mental health, women's rights, gay rights, and domestic violence. It brought conversations that had mostly lived in newspapers and political debates directly into American living rooms disguised as comedy. The most explosive moment came in November 1972, with a 2-part episode known as Maude's Dilemma, in which the character discovers she's pregnant at 47 and, after real deliberation, chooses to have an abortion, 2 months before Roe v. Wade would make the procedure legal nationwide. Dozens of local stations refused to air it. Sponsors pulled back. CBS was flooded with protest mail, and the national press spent weeks debating where entertainment's boundaries should sit. Despite all that, an estimated 65 million viewers watched the episodes across their original airing and reruns, and many of the stations that initially refused eventually aired it once the backlash cooled. Decades later, Television historians still point to it as one of the medium's most significant turning points. Maude's success made her one of the most recognizable actresses in the country. She picked up steady Emmy and Golden Globe nominations for the role, finally winning the Emmy for Outstanding Lead Actress in a Comedy Series in 1977. While the show was still airing, she took on other projects too, reprising Vera Charles in the 1974 film version of Mame, a critical and commercial disappointment, and appearing in the widely mocked Star Wars Holiday Special as well as her own TV special. By 1978, even though Maude was still performing well in the ratings, she asked for the series to end. She felt the character's story had run its natural course and had no interest in stretching it out simply because it was still profitable, a decision that surprised a lot of people but reflected how she approached her career throughout her life. The years right after Maude were quieter. She stayed visible through specials, award shows, and guest spots, including a memorable turn in the Star Wars Holiday Special and a CBS special built specifically around her. In 1983, she tried another sitcom, Amanda's, an American remake of the British comedy Fawlty Towers, but it never found an audience and was cancelled after only 10 of its 13 completed episodes aired. It was her first real professional stumble since Maude made her a star, and the early 80s became one of the rare slow stretches in her career. Then, in 1985, writer Susan Harris created a character seemingly built entirely around her. Dorothy Zbornak, a sharp-witted divorced schoolteacher sharing a Miami home with her mother and two friends. Bea Arthur read the script and signed on almost immediately. Alongside Betty White, Rue McClanahan, and Estelle Getty, she became part of the Golden Girls, one of the most beloved ensemble casts in television history. The show was a hit from its very first season, running for 7 seasons and 180 episodes and landing among the 10 highest-rated programs in the country for 6 of those 7 years. Beyond the ratings, it fundamentally changed how television portrayed older women. Instead of relegating them to background roles as mothers or grandmothers, it placed 4 women in their 50s, 60s, and beyond at the absolute center of the story, giving them full lives, romances, careers, and conflicts of their own. Dorothy and Maude were both strong-willed characters, but Bea Arthur never played them the same way. Where Maude was loud and combative, Dorothy got her laughs through stillness, perfectly timed pauses, and a single dry line landing harder than any punchline. That deadpan delivery, paired with her deep voice and almost expressionless face, became her defining comic signature, and it's part of why Dorothy remains one of the most fondly remembered characters in sitcom history. The Golden Girls brought her a second Emmy in 1988, again for Outstanding Lead Actress in a Comedy Series. Remarkably, every member of the show's core cast eventually won an Emmy of their own, a rare feat for any ensemble sitcom. Off-screen, she'd already known Rue McClanahan from their Maude days, and their chemistry picked back up easily. Her friendship with Angela Lansbury, forged during Mame, continued for decades. She respected Estelle Getty deeply, despite Getty playing her mother while actually being slightly younger in real life and spending hours in makeup to pull it off. Her relationship with Betty White got the most media attention. The two had very different personalities and working styles, and while they were never as close as she was with McClanahan, they stayed professional throughout all 7 seasons. In 1992, with the show still performing well, she once again chose to walk away on her own terms, believing it had reached its natural stopping point. The remaining 3 cast members carried on briefly in a spin-off, The Golden Palace, in which she appeared only once as a guest, and which was cancelled after a single season. Bea Arthur rarely discussed her personal life publicly, and her image, a fearless, opinionated woman ready to argue with anyone, was strikingly different from the person who existed at home. Friends often noted she'd rather stay in than attend a Hollywood party. Her first marriage came during her Marine Corps years, to Robert Allen Ortha in 1944, a serviceman who later became a television writer, director, and producer. The marriage lasted only about 3 years and ended quietly, without children or public conflict. She kept a version of his surname afterward, adjusting the spelling from Ortha to Arthur, the name that would eventually appear on Broadway marquees and above the titles of 2 of American television's most influential shows. Her second marriage to Gene Saks began in 1950 after they met at the New School's dramatic workshop, both then struggling actors. Their relationship developed slowly through years of auditions and modest roles before turning romantic. They married and stayed together for nearly 3 decades, functioning as both spouses and creative partners, discussing roles, following each other's careers, and at times working directly together, as with Mame in 1966. They adopted 2 sons, Matthew and Daniel. Matthew went into acting and Daniel into stage design. She worked hard to shield both boys from media attention throughout her career. As Maude turned her into a national name through the late 1960s and beyond, the gap between her fame and Sax's comparatively quieter career widened. There's no indication their marriage involved scandal or public conflict, but the differing pace of their lives, combined with the pressure of her sudden visibility, eventually pulled them apart. They divorced quietly in 1978, without messy legal battles or tabloid drama, and remained respectful of one another afterward. She never remarried. Much of her remaining time went to her sons, later her grandchildren, and a small circle of close friends including Lansbury and actress Adrienne Barbeau, all of whom recalled her strong preference for home life over industry socializing. In her later years, when asked what she might change if she could live her life over, she didn't mention her awards or her most famous roles. She said she wished she'd spent more time with her children, one of the rare moments she spoke openly about personal regret. As the 21st century began, she deliberately slowed down, choosing projects only when they genuinely interested her rather than chasing visibility. She appeared in Malcolm in the Middle, voiced a character in Futurama, played Larry David's mother on Curb Your Enthusiasm, and delivered a widely talked-about set of risque lines at the 2005 Comedy Central roast of Pamela Anderson. Alongside these appearances, she toured extensively with one-woman stage shows, An Evening with Bea Arthur followed by And Then There's Bea and Bea Arthur on Broadway, Just Between Friends, taking the productions not just around the US but to the UK, Australia and South Africa, performing well into her 80s. She also devoted increasing energy to causes she cared about, particularly women's equality, Jewish community organizations, animal welfare, and, especially in her final years, homeless LGBTQ+ youth. In 2005, despite declining health, she helped raise roughly $40,000 for the Ollie Forney Center, an organization supporting homeless LGBTQ+ teenagers, and spoke often about how unjust it was for young people to be rejected by their own families simply for who they were. What almost no one knew during this period was that she was quietly battling lung cancer, a consequence of years of smoking. She kept her diagnosis private, even from many colleagues, continuing to work and perform without revealing what she was managing behind the scenes. She died at her home in Los Angeles on April 25, 2009, at age 86. Tributes arrived quickly. Angela Lansbury called her the closest friend she'd ever had, saying she felt both heartbroken and, in a strange way, relieved that Bea Arthur was no longer suffering. Adrienne Barbeau remembered a generous colleague who would happily hand a better line to a fellow actor if it made a scene stronger. Betty White and Rue McClanahan spoke of an irreplaceable loss, both personally and for the Golden Girls fans who adored her. Broadway theaters dimmed their marquee lights for a minute in her honor. Her generosity continued after her death. Her will included a $300,000 gift to the Ollie Forney Center, and in 2017 the organization opened the Bea Arthur Residence, permanent housing for young people who had nowhere else to go. It wasn't a plaque or an award bearing her name. It was an actual home for people who needed one. Bea Arthur never changed television by fitting a glamorous mold. She changed it by refusing to. Before Maude and the Golden Girls, sitcoms rarely put a woman in her 40s or older at the center of the story. When they appeared at all, it was usually as a supporting mother figure. Through Maude Findlay and later Dorothy Zbornak, she proved that women in that stage of life could carry an entire series, with strong opinions, complicated lives, and storylines compelling enough to draw tens of millions of viewers every single week. Maude alone pushed sitcoms into territory almost no comedy had dared touch. Abortion, divorce, alcoholism, mental health, domestic violence, and both women's and gay rights, all folded into primetime entertainment. Many of those episodes sparked genuine national arguments at the time. Decades later, they're remembered as milestones. That willingness to go there helped open the door for later shows to handle serious social issues without abandoning comedy altogether. Her acting style mattered just as much as her subject matter. She rarely leaned on exaggerated expressions or physical comedy. Instead, she built her humor around stillness, a flat delivery, and timing precise enough that a single unchanged expression could land a joke perfectly. That deadpan approach became her signature, and is still cited by comedians and writers as one of the hardest styles to pull off convincingly. Her career path was also unusual for someone of her stature. She didn't arrive in Hollywood with conventional looks or become famous young. It took nearly 30 years from her first off-Broadway appearance to real national recognition. A reminder, often invoked in discussions of her life, that persistence and timing can carry someone further than looks or early buzz ever could. Long after her death, her influence is still visible. In the continued popularity of reruns, in the writers who cite her as a reference point for strong older female characters, and very literally in a residence in New York that still opens its doors to young people with nowhere else to turn. Between Maude's sharp political monologues and Dorothy's perfectly timed one-liners, Bea Arthur spent a career proving that age, appearance, and other people's expectations didn't have to define anyone's limits. And she spent her final years quietly extending that same idea to people who needed to hear it most.